Today, I'm going to talk about styling React components with styled components. And styled components is a CSS-in-JS library, and I'll get to what that is in a second. A bit about me. So my name is Devin Huapaya. I'm a freelance developer. I've been freelancing 3 years now, which is actually how long styled components has been out. Possibly a coincidence, possibly not. I'm into photography, nature, beards, and tech, and this is a photo of me in the wild engaging in all of those activities at the same time. I was gonna put I'm lonely in this slide, but I decided to make it a little happier. I need more friends. I moved to Seattle in 2018, end of the year. It was winter, it was cold, it was dark, I didn't know anyone. I could always have more developer friends, so feel free to reach out if you're interested. I'm on Twitter as Devin Papaya, like the fruit, and that's also my website, devinpapaya.com. And then, once again, really, I'm like the thing I care most about right now, as far as freelancing and stuff, is that link. So it's just bit.ly/learnreact.js. I'd really appreciate anyone who wants to check out that Skillshare class. So, CSS-in-JS. Is anyone using styled components right now? Got a decent majority, maybe a majority, it's like a good half. As far as other ways of styling React components, is anyone using React with just straight up CSS? Got a few people, pretty cool. What about inline object styles, like just using styles and then passing in objects? Very few. Interesting. I know, like I have a few friends that are into React and they love the inline style just because it like keeps everything together. And the reason, well, yeah, like that's really cool because you can access props and stuff, but you can't do a lot of the things you can do in CSS, which is where CSS-in-JS comes in. And CSS-in-JS is really any library that puts styles into JS. Like, I assume that a lot of the people came over from, like, back in the day, before we had CSS-in-JS, we used Ruby to like compile Sass code into CSS, and you'd import that into your app. And you'd have to go through a lot of hoops to get like performance styles that worked in a component way. This is from the Styled Components website. Basically, it's the result of trying to enhance CSS for use specifically with React, but it also works with Vue and other component type libraries. As Patrick Star said in SpongeBob, we should take CSS and put it in JavaScript. So why are styled components so cool? So there's a few different CSS and JS libraries. What makes styled components really awesome is one of the things it does is like automatically inlines critical CSS. So back in the day, so right now when a page loads, basically it'll see what component is on the page and it'll only load the styles for that component and it will inline it. So if you're doing like server-side rendering, basically that gives you really fast inline styles without a lot of headaches. And nested styles and inheritance. So if you were used to Sass like me, I used Sass until this year really because I just like couldn't get over using nested styles and selectors, and I hadn't gotten on board with CSS and JS yet. So styled components, like if you're used to doing that, it does that very well. And then on top of having nested styles and inheritance, it also manages dynamic styles. So now you can like change the color of stuff based on properties from components, or even like in making an API call and getting some sort of data and manipulating styles that way. And then automatic vendor prefixing, which is really important. Gone are the days of having to type -webkit background image. Now all that's kind of done for you. If you're just getting into web development now, like you're getting it really easy, and it's a good time to get in, I guess, for sure. But back in the day, this was a huge thing, and now it's all done in JavaScript. Styled Components also has a solid theming library, so you can use shared styles across your entire app, so you can feel like you're using an app and not just like a collection of components. And then it works with React, it works with React Native, it works with React VR, it works pretty much any place you can use web components. You can use styled components or some variation of it. Yeah, so installation, really simple. So you just do yarn add styled components, and that's it. That's the end of the talk. That's all I have. Go use styled components. Thank you. I have a little demo that I put together, and if I somehow have more time, I'll go into a little more complicated demo. But styled components works with Create React App. So this, I decided to not live code it because that's risky. But this is basically a Create React app that I've just added styled components to. And using it in the app is relatively straightforward. So you just import it this way. Styled components, the default is this styled thing, and that's like the main way of styling, but then it also has a few helpers that we'll go over in just a second. So tagged template literals. If you've seen styled components in the wild, like this is what one looks like. So this is how you declare a component with styled components. And this is basically saying take a div and attach this CSS to it. So this is the app body. In this case, it has a minimum height of 100 VH, which is just saying like make it the size of the viewport, and then it's doing some flex stuff to center content. And if we go to the app, we can see it has a background, and this is using a variable, but we'll get to that in just a second. But essentially it's setting the background, it's making it big, and it's centering the content. So that's how that looks, and this is what it looks like in the actual render function. And so this is React component, and then you can see it has a theme provider, which goes to that theme thing we were talking about, and then this is how the components are used in the app. It's very straightforward. And if you're used to using React, you're used to doing class name, app body, but this, what it will do, we can go ahead and check the rendered component, but it will essentially generate a class name for you. And this is what app body turns into, is this jumble of letters. This could be a bit of a learning gap. You can actually use a plugin, a Babel plugin, to show the name of the component, but if you just use it straight from Create React App, this is what it will look like. So if that's like a turnoff, that's something to keep in mind. If you like absolutely have to use Create React App, and you also want to see the class names, maybe consider another library. But beyond that, like I said, if you do eject it, you can see those hashed names. But this is what the actual compiler is seeing. So it is taking those styles and it is putting them in line. So if you go to the head, you can see here this data styled. It does cache styles for you as well, so that's why it has this version here. And then we can see these little styles here. Basically, let's try to find our body. This is the body. You can see here the background color was set to this color. It has a minimum height, and this flex content with all the vendor prefixes added to it. And yeah, so that at its core is what styled components does. This is great. You can use this a lot. And those are tagged template literals. Let's not get ahead of myself, and we'll just go in the order of the slides. So a global style. So say you, for whatever reason, like the style component doesn't work for you, like you want to change all of the H1s, all of the like typography or anything like that, then you can use this global style, and this essentially generates CSS just like the styled does. It's imported from styled components as well, and you just use the same tagged template literal, and then you can just write your CSS in this as well. It's not scoped, so that's why it's global styles. So it's not quite like CSS modules. It's not like having a root property. That is what this is. Like, you'll notice styled component by itself, there's no brackets here. Like, it's treating app body as the root element for that like piece of CSS, and then for the global styles you have to actually say body, and then we're defining just some basic like font size here. So this could just be 16, for example, which is the default font size for browsers. So that's all this global style is doing. And then when you use it in the app, those styles are getting put everywhere. So like that affects the body no matter where it is. So here it's inside of app body. It could be inside of this button even, and it would still change the global styles. The value in that is, if you have just some conditional on the page, it makes it really easy to update your global styles. So global styles are relatively easy. If you have some CSS you just need to throw in, that's where you would put it. We talked about defining styles with the app body component. So now extending styles. So let's talk about these buttons that we have on the screen. So this is a button. See here it has a border, and we'll get into passing these props in just a second, but you can see it has a background and it has a padding, color, white, and pointer. So we go here, this is what our button looks like. And then if you want to have like a secondary button, instead of using styled dot whatever the HTML tag is, you call it as a function, and you can pass in any custom component. So this is how, like, you could pass in any React component into here. It's not specific to things that have already passed through the styled pipeline, but if you also, this is also the way you extend any sort of component in styled. So that's how you extend styles. Alright, so let's talk about these props now. So this is our button, secondary button. You can see I wrote this or a lot. So the way you inherit any prop to styled components is using a function. So this being a template literal, has anyone used, well, I guess I could just, this is a thing like in ES6. You could have a string variable, and then if you use backticks, not a single quote, but the tick marker next to the one, it allows you to basically take a string and then you can add math here, and then this string value, string variable is like appended here. So it's very similar. If you're used to using ES6, it just looks a little scary because it's like not on the same line, but the same principle is essentially happening. But with styled components, you pass in a function, and the function is the props of that component. So button here, you can see if props background, it will use that as the background color. And then generally speaking, I don't like to just have a single prop, because if there's no background defined here, then you don't, like, we should have some kind of fallback. So we could do something like white here as well. You can see that that background is now white on that first button. I apologize for that hovering effect. That was a cool little thing I want to show you later on. But I'm just going to take this as an opportunity to say this is how you comment out code in styled components. So comments work just like that. I got rid of that little hover effect thing that you might have been witnessing a second ago. So here's the background color. If there's not one provided, it'll just be white. If we go to where the component is used and we give it a background color, it will make it the color of that property. So that is how you can do a bunch of different stuff here with the button container. You can see I'm adding max width. You can also use Boolean properties. So this I'm giving, so this button container is just another styled component. This is what I'm putting my buttons on inside of the page. It's flexing the buttons in the center, and it's making them spread out from each other. And then here is essentially doing the same thing. This is ES6, so this can be written as props.maxWidth. So if max width is passed as a prop, we can add some extra styles to the style component, and that's what's making this button container that size. And then this fluid attribute that was added to button container is just another property. If you have a React component and it just has this property without an attribute set, it is registered as true. So in this case, we're getting fluid from the props, checking if it's true or false, essentially, or if it's there, and then setting the width and height to 100%. So if we didn't have this, it wouldn't spread out. So fluid is a common term, at least in Bootstrap, for their container sizes. If fluid set, it makes it spread out to the size of the container, which is essentially what I was emulating there. And I want to talk about the theme provider. Undo anything I've just done. Sorry for anyone who has epilepsy. I have ADD, so I go all over the place sometimes. So the theme provider. This is like the real last piece of the puzzle for styled components. So basically, it's a lot like a store provider for Redux, in that whereas a store provider allows you to use connect and then get your Redux store and your React component, the theme provider accepts a JSON object and it allows you to access it through your props on a styled component. So I'm pretty sure like the theme isn't registered. Like if you just say, like there isn't like a connect version for styled components, but whenever you call the props from a styled component, it always has the theme if it's inside of the provider. So in the case of this button, if the background isn't provided, it's using props.theme.primary button color. So I have a primary button color set to black, and it's getting it from the props. If we didn't have the theme provider, theme would be undefined. This would throw an error. And then themes can be like anything you want them to be. It's literally just JavaScript that's passed in. A couple of things that I find generally helpful to keep in a theme are breakpoints. So like you can have a unified set of breakpoints instead of having min width 700 everywhere on each of your styled components. Like to me, that defeats the purpose of using like reusability and components at all. If you're going to have a bunch of hard-coded numbers everywhere in your CSS, why not just use CSS? But with styled components, you can use these themes, and that really lets you share all of your styles across all of your different components. And here is just exporting a default object, and then passing it into the theme provider. And we're doing the same thing with app body. So you can see the app body has a background, and then it's using this curly bracket syntax, passing in a function with the props. Props has a theme and a primary background color. So here's that primary background color is just set to Huapaya whip, which I found out is like a web safe color, and I love using it now because it sounds like my name. So that's where this color is coming from on the app body. And then you can have secondary colors, etc. For me, this is usually like a lot of files, and then you can import files into your theme and stuff. You don't necessarily have to use a theme provider if that seems like a lot of work to you. You could just as easily do something like this, where you import the theme and then don't bother with the props at all. I think this concept can work with like constants and stuff, or if you're using like moment or something, you could like put anything in that function that you want to. You can even, if you needed to do some like debugging on your theme, as long as you're like returning a string value, that's just what's going to get inserted into this template literal. So back on the web page, you can see that that debugger is hit, and our props has a theme, and all of our theme variables are inside of that, and everyone's happy. It's great. Yeah, so that's how the theme provider works in styled components. How do media queries work? Let me tell you. So what's something we'd want a media query on? Probably this button container. So when I have the breakpoints in the theme, you could write medium in with here, and this would work just as well. So what this is doing is just changing the flex direction of this container. So let me save this. So here it's row, a row container that has the buttons set up next to each other, and then right at, you can see 700 pixels, it's going from being a row layout to a column layout. So really great for that. And yeah, so any sort of pseudo selector as well. So like you could do hover here if you wanted to be crazy. Would that work? That doesn't work, doesn't like that. Yeah. So with Sass, the syntax before was ampersand. Now it's just like whatever's at this root level is. So you could also do like after here, or anything really. But that's how media queries work. And then media queries specifically, I like to put in a theme. The other pseudo selectors doesn't necessarily make sense to have in a theme, but yeah. So these curly brackets, they're just injecting strings into wherever they are in the styled component. So in this case, I'm using them as a selector. I guess you could also do something like yeah, that would work as well. Yep, so that's pretty much how the curly brackets work in styled components. That can throw some people off whenever they're first starting. If this specific syntax doesn't make sense to you, if you're like really new to React, this is how you can get the like nested properties inside of an argument. So instead of doing props, this is just a shorthand for like props.theme. So it just gives you less, you have to type after you write that arrow function. And nesting, right, so I get to talk about that fun, weird thing I was doing with the button earlier. Sorry if that was weird and threw you off. Basically, so we talked about extending styled components by passing them in as a function. What happens if we put it in this curly bracket? So basically, this is creating a reference to the generated style from the component. So you can do like weird stuff like whenever this button is hovered on and it's a sibling of this particular element, then change the background to whatever the theme background or theme primary color is. So here, this button component that we styled is hovered, and because it's next to the secondary button, which has this weird nested selector on it, it changes color. Yeah, and it does much more. Styled components are great. I think it's like the future of CSS. That is like to say Whereas like you think of styled components as like the baseline, like there's more libraries being created with styled components. It can be used for animating with keyframes. If you're used to using inline styles, it has an API that works around inline styles and allows you to create and like get the same advantages out of it that way. You can use it without a component at all, just to generate CSS properties. If you are using styled components and you're like looking for something really cool, I recommend checking out Styled System. It's kind of like giving styled components superpowers in the sense that it just like adds a lot of extra helpers for like margins and padding and some theme like helpers as well, I believe. And then another really cool project is called Rebase. It's kind of like Bootstrap built on top of styled components, and it's a lot of fun. And it's easy to add to existing projects, so I highly encourage just checking it out and seeing what you can make. Oh, some drawbacks with styled components. So it is still like relatively new, 3 years-ish old. There, so you might have seen in the presentation, there is no editor syntax like highlighting or auto suggestions. I spelled suggestions wrong there. I apologize. See, if that was in CS styled components, it wouldn't have caught it. If I was using VS Code, my favorite editor, with like regular CSS, it totally would have caught that error. It can lead to lazier developing because you're like just putting more stuff in React components, and I think it like it makes it easier just to be lazy. Like you probably think like styled.div everywhere is fine, which it is. It is mostly fine unless like but it's not as accessible. It's like maybe this should be main and this should be section. That's kind of a problem with React development in general. Like accessibility tends to get thrown out the window, and it's like, why not just make everything a div and inline all the styles? This helps you with the styles part of it. It doesn't help so much with like the actual accessibility part of it, but it does work with pretty much any like native HTML tag. So you should still be trying to use more than just the div if you can with styled. And it's a lot of stuff to put in one file is one of the big drawbacks. You can see this one itself. This is more of an example, but you can get pretty large like components having styles inside of your component as well. And if you wanted to, you could separate the component from the styles. One convention that I've seen is you'll have like component.style.js next to the component.js, and then just import it in and use it that way. For me, honestly, the biggest drawback is like not having syntax highlighting.
Really good package.
Yeah, so in summary, use CSS-in-JS. Maybe use styled components if you're interested. There's a lot of libraries out there. Styled components is definitely the biggest. It's still relatively new. There's lots of great features. There's a huge community, and there's some but not many drawbacks. So thank you so much for your time. If you want to check out this link, it's bit.ly/learnreact.js.com. I apologize, I made the email address required. If you just want to tell me about the slideshow and what you thought about it, that'd be really awesome. And if you don't want an email, just like leave a note that says you don't want an email. But yeah, thank you so much for your time.